This week on Quadriga, Syrian catastrophe, no way out? It's a civil war in all but name. Fierce fighting between rebels and security forces continues in Homs and several other cities. In Damascus, a security clampdown has been imposed, especially following car bomb attacks last weekend. Meanwhile, as diplomats struggle to stop the violence, civilians are fleeing across Syria's borders, and neither side in the conflict has the upper hand. Your host on today's show is Ali Aslan.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga. The conflict in Syria has been going on for exactly 1 year now. So, is there a way out of this dilemma? And if so, what needs to be done? That's what we are going to talk about today, together with my three guests. Alexandra Ra is an author and the director of the Bertolt Brecht Center, a think tank on Russia at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Stefan Buchen is a reporter for the German broadcaster ARD. He is an expert on the Middle East and still reports frequently from the region. And Heiko Wimmen was a journalist based in Beirut and is now a member of the Middle East Research Group at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Thank you all for being here. Alexandra, Russia has so far vetoed not one, but 2 UN resolutions on Syria. But lately we've seen a shift in Russian policy, haven't we? First, Moscow supported the call for ceasefire by the Red Cross, and now Russia is supporting the Annan peace plan. Are we seeing a shift in Russian policy towards Syria?
Let's see how far Russia will go in supporting the new plan. This would be my first comment. The second comment is Putin won the elections, and the electoral cycle is over in Russia. It may sound strange for Western ears, but in Russia you have a very traditionalist population, which would be very critical of a foreign policy of Russia, which would basically become a policy of a junior partnership for the West. This is a very important reason. And third, I think that Russia's policy in this region is twilight in a way. On the one hand, the Russians do not want to change the world order. They and the Chinese insist on the old world order, where state sovereignty prevails over every other question. At the same time, Russia does not want to be isolated from the international community because it desperately needs Western technology, Western money in order to modernize its economy. And I think that the new leadership, Putin, Medvedev, now in place again, would rather go for more cooperation with the West, and they understand that they have to do it by also playing the same game in foreign policy.
So if I understand you correctly, Russia's shift in policy towards Syria is not a sign of Moscow's patience wearing thin with Assad, but rather that the election cycle is over now.
I would say the shift, if it's a shift, let's be careful, if it's a shift, then Russia wants to conduct a more pragmatic policy with the West. The West is more important than the fate of Assad for Russians.
Stefan Buchen, the United Nations yesterday approved a a presidential statement rather, based on the Annan peace plan, which calls for an immediate ceasefire and access to humanitarian organizations. But it is a presidential statement at the end of the day. It's not a UN resolution, meaning it's non-binding. How effective can it be?
I don't expect that it will be very effective in a very short delay. There is still the international division between Russia and China on one hand and Western countries on the other hand, who are more critical of the Assad regime. And there were frequent calls from Washington and also European capitals to President Assad to step down. In fact, we are seeing a war going on in Syria. And in my assessment, there is no chance now for a peaceful solution of the conflict. There's a military conflict going on, and I expect that the outcome will also be a military one. That means one of the two sides, or the Syrian regime, or the armed resistance, or the armed insurrection, will prevail at the end of the day with military means. And my guess is that the opposition, the armed opposition, will win at the end of the day, but that may take lots of time still.
Well, we will talk, of course, in more detail about the opposition. But Heiko Wimmen, again, back to the Annan peace plan for a second. It calls for further steps if Assad fails to comply. How could these further steps look like?
Well, I mean, that's left hanging, right? And what is quite interesting is if you look at the Syrian press or the pro-Syrian press, which I do every morning. Doesn't make for good reading over your breakfast, but you have to do that. And they're all for it. You know, they say this is great. You know, this presidential statement and the Annan plan supports our position, which basically is that we are fighting terrorists. You know, it calls on both sides to stop the violence. You know, they say, well, I mean, we're prepared to stop the violence, but the other side has to stop too. And if we think about that for a second, the other side, who is the other side? There is no unified structure of decision or command or control on the other side. You know, you have these groups that are operating everywhere, that are getting increasingly armed, and there's nobody anywhere who could tell them, okay, now we make a tactical decision, we have a ceasefire for 6 hours, we see what the government does. If the government keeps attacking, we start to shooting back again. There's nobody who can do that. You know, so basically, what they can do, the government, is they can say we stopped attacking for 6 hours. They keep shooting. What do you expect us to do?
So as you mentioned, the opposition is deeply divided. The Syrian National Council and the Free Syrian Army are divided. They are only unified, if you will, in their wish of the removal of Assad, but not much else. Is it not true?
Well, divided is I think is too easy. I mean, the problem is really that they don't have a unified structure. You know, they don't have a system to actually be one actor. You know, they may agree on this, they may agree on that, and then the next day you hear that the general in Antakya or whoever he is says he doesn't recognize the council anymore and all of this. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if they agree on this or that. It matters if they're able to be one actor, which is not the case.
And Alexandra Ra, the Human Rights Watch has said that there are human rights abuses also committed on the part of the opposition. Does that bode well for the reputation, if you will, of the opposition in Syria? At the end of the day, it was a David versus Goliath fight up until now, where the bad guys and the good guys were rather clear, at least from the Western point of view. But with the Human Rights Watch now coming out saying human rights abuses are also being perpetrated by the opposition, what do you say to that?
Look, let's not be naive. We are, as you just said, in a war. In a real civil war with both sides fighting each other with heavy weapons. And in this case, of course, both sides commit crimes from our point of view. Maybe they fight for a better life for themselves, but they commit crimes. So organizations like Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch did their job. They can't interfere in these scenarios any more than they did before, because we're in a war. And actually, this was also, from my point of view, the Russian position from the beginning, saying let us disarm also the opposition forces, which are probably armed from outside, in order to stop the bloodshed in this country. Because we can't only demand from Assad's troops to go back into the armed concerns and stay there until the other side is also heavily armed. So I think that we have detected already also a slight shift of the Western, US and EU position towards the criticism which was voiced from Russia before.
Stefan Buchen, the fighting has now spilled over to Aleppo and even Damascus as well. How significant is that?
This is very significant because this uprising started about 1 year ago in provincial areas of Syria, like Daraa in the south, close to the Jordanian border, or Idlib close in the north, close to the Turkish border, and in cities with a large Sunni majority like Hama and Homs. And now we are seeing that the uprising is spreading to the capital, Damascus, and Aleppo, the commercial center in the north. Both cities had been quite calm during months, and now the uprising is spreading there. For me, this is another sign that proves that the regime's days may be counted. There may be still many days, but I think the regime will not be able to survive at the end of the day. So the resistance movement is getting stronger in that way, but the regime still is fighting back. That's what we see in Homs, for example, where the quarter of Baba Amr, which was a center of the armed resistance during many months, was taken by the government forces. So there are ups and downs on both sides, but on a general, out of a general view, we may say that the resistance forces is getting stronger and stronger, and the regime slowly is falling apart.
And of course, the fighting so far have taken a heavy toll, human toll that is. United Nations figures put the death toll at about 8,000, and 250,000, 250,000 people have been displaced from their homes, which also means that a heavy influx of refugees are now spreading into neighboring countries. And let's take a quick look at what countries are affected the most.
They fear torture, imprisonment and death. 250,000 people have fled the violence in Syria, according to the UN. Most have sought safety in neighbouring Arab states Jordan and Lebanon. The onslaught by the Syrian military in the north is forcing thousands into Turkey. They scramble through the barbed wire along the border. There are now more than 16,000 Syrian refugees in Turkey, and the government is bracing for more.
The increase in numbers has accelerated. In just a few weeks, we've experienced the kind of increase we were seeing over 4 or 5 months.
Ankara has raised the possibility of establishing a security zone inside Syria to protect the fleeing civilians. But that raises the spectre of direct military confrontation between Syria and NATO member Turkey.
Well, Heiko Wimmen, we just saw Turkey is heavily affected by the influx of refugees coming in from Syria across the border. Turkey's position, explain to us Turkey's position. Tayyip Erdogan, the Turkish Prime Minister, was for a long time an ally, a friend of Assad. Of course, they made a complete switch, a complete turnaround. How do you assess Turkey's situation in this conflict?
Turkey is in a very difficult position. I mean, if you look at the geography, Turkey has 2 big neighbors that are allies of Assad, Russia and Iran. Russia is not a direct neighbor, but they're very important links, energy, pipelines, gas, and all of this. So that's difficult. Turkey wants to be a player in the region. It had a policy of 0 problems with the neighbors. That doesn't look like it's going to work much longer, or it's not working anymore. So that's really problematic. Erdogan has gone all out for democracy in the region, in Tunisia, and then even more so in Egypt. And one may suspect that the idea that democratic processes will bring parties into power that to some extent resemble his own party, moderate parties with an Islamist direction, that's, from the Turkish point of view, is a very interesting prospect.
Alexander, do you foresee a military conflict, as was suggested by the trailer we just saw, a direct military conflict between Turkey and Syria? Do you think that Turkey could get military involved?
I think this will depend on the position of NATO, whether to get involved or not. Turkey alone without NATO will not get involved. But, sorry, we should not forget about another dimension of this conflict which we are discussing. In my view, we are having an overlapping of 2 conflicts now, and this makes the situation in the Near East very, very explosive and dangerous. Iran. It's most probable now that Iran will be attacked by Israel this year in order to destroy Bashar and other nuclear infrastructure in this country. And Syria, of course, that's not only a neighbor, but as the only ally of Syria, Syria and Iran are allies, will of course be then placed in a double conflict with the West. I don't know the outcome of this conflict. It's a horrible scenario, but I hope that if we, from the Western point of view, have to intervene or want to intervene, that we are clear about the consequences.
And Stefan Buchen, as a matter of fact, we are seeing various conflicts projected into the Syrian civil war, aren't we? I mean, at the end of the day, it's also Iran versus Saudi Arabia and Qatar here. It's a Sunni-Shia conflict, if you will, that has taken place through several proxies in Syria itself.
For sure, the geostrategic balance of the Middle East is changing very quickly. The axis Tehran-Damascus and also stretching up to Hezbollah in Lebanon was one of the fixed realities of Middle Eastern geostrategy. This is changing. The Saudis have been working very hard and also very secretly, if I may say, for years to get influence in Syria. They are working on the Sunni majority, which had a difficult position under the Assad regime. But the Saudi target was to take out Syria from this axis and this alliance with Iran and to bring it back into the Arab Sunni world, if we may say. And the Saudis are feeling that this aim they had been working on for years is now very close, and they may reach it within weeks or months. We also must talk about Hamas. Khalid Mash'al, the leader of Hamas, had been a guest of the Assad regime for years. He left Damascus a few weeks ago, and now he's not an ally and a protege, if you want, of Tehran anymore. He is now a guest of Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Jordan. That means Hamas switched from the alliance with Tehran to the Sunni world. So that's what I wanted to say. Geostrategy is changing very fastly. The Assad regime may fall apart very quickly, but this doesn't mean that Tehran and the Mullah regime is finished or is running out of allies. They still also have an alliance with Russia and China on the one hand, and we may not forget that there's Iraq. Iraq was, under Saddam Hussein, was an enemy of Iran, and nowadays, under the Prime Minister Maliki, Iraq is a new ally of Iran, and Iraq may take the role in some way of Syria in the new Middle East.
So, as you said, we might see the impacts of the Syrian conflict beyond Syria's border for many years to come, perhaps. Heiko Wimmen, there are even reports that al-Qaeda is now getting into the midst of it all. It is calling on jihadis to join the fight and to support its Sunni Muslim brothers.
Well, I mean, from the reports that I've been seeing already since the past year, they've always been around. And don't forget that Al-Qaeda in Iraq had quite a few Syrian fighters who simply went home at some point, so they're there. That's not really and I don't think that this is, at this point in time, it's really a problem. I mean, there are sort of like freeloaders, free riders on the movement. They're using this movement to pursue their own agenda.
But doesn't it distract from the initial aim of the opposition? They wanted more freedom, they wanted more liberties,
it does.
And now it's taken on a very religious context.
It does play into the hands of the regime, into the propaganda of the regime. And what we should not forget is that during the time of the confrontation in Iraq, the Syrian secret services were heavily involved in the transfer of fighters through Syria to Iraq. So there have always been connections between the Syrian secret services and these networks. Now, to what extent the Syrians control them, if they control everybody or not, that nobody knows that. But it gives you pause to think who's really behind these bombings.
And it does get messy. It has gotten messy already in Syria. The Guardian, the British newspaper The Guardian, published the Assad emails. And it shows a man who is, if you will, a bit detached from reality, while his country is going through wild turmoils. He's more busy downloading iTunes and acquiring expensive chandeliers, if you will, from abroad. What does it tell you?
It's telling me that we're entering a new stage of war, the cyber war, the internet war, the war in the electronic networks, where, of course, those people who fight Assad have the better means, the better ideas, better fantasy in order to show the world what this guy is. They did the same with Gaddafi. They did the same with Mubarak. Through electronic media, it was shown how these people behave and who they are. And I think this is part of course, of a kind of propaganda in order to isolate a leader. But I want to say something to your very interesting scenario. I mean, if this comes true, what you just said, then it's a huge victory, of course, for the Western interest indeed. We will have then more stability than I thought before. I don't think that Russia and China are allies of Iran. I think that Russia and China are interested in creating a world order where, which is more balanced, where the Americans will not dominate them, but they will not stick till the end to Iran. So from your scenario, which I share, you said it better than anyone else had described it so far. Iran will be an isolated country, and then losing and solving the Syrian problem, we might be very close to solving also the Iranian.
I didn't say that Iran will be an isolated country. It's quite the contrary. I said that Iran still has allies, and Russia and China are the most important ones. When I say that, I don't deny that Russia and China, both countries, are very sensitive towards what they say publicly, how they behave at the Security Council. They won't defend any step taken by the regime in Tehran. But still, as you said, China and Russia are aiming to change the world to a more multipolar one and stop the world order which was established in 1990 when the United States were the only dominating superpower. This policy of Russia and China is being realized now on the Syrian and also on the Iranian issue. And this is a reality which Western countries have to face.
Yeah.
Heiko Wimmen, just one short answer to the question of we have seen that the Assad emails. I just want to get back to that one brief moment because it shows that his security chiefs, if you will, security chiefs are shielding him from the real news. So how can we expect any changes from a man who doesn't get the real hard facts on the ground?
I'm not so sure about that. There was a report on Al Jazeera, I'm not sure yesterday or when it exactly was, and they had a defector from the secret services who actually brought tons of documents bearing the signature of the president, giving decrees about how to deal with demonstrations in Damascus and stuff like that. And I wonder if somebody who signs these reports doesn't realize what's going on. But I want to sort of hold a bit against the tendency that may emerge here. I'm not sure. I don't think you are supporting it, but maybe the audience will get that impression. This regime is not fallen yet, and we don't know when it will fall. I don't agree that the Israelis are going to attack Iran this year. I think this is election bluster. Netanyahu has an election coming up. And I don't think it's happening. I think it's hot air. And a former Israeli minister has said 2 days ago, in the Middle East, if you want to shoot. Don't talk about it. So it's not going. I don't think it's going to happen. I think this regime believes, and sincerely believes, and has good reason to believe that it can fight on for quite a while. The security forces are holding up, or those security forces that they are using are holding up so far. The defections that you have, the people who go over to the Free Syrian Army, are so far inconsequential for the functioning of the repression apparatus. That still holds up. And there are reports that they have been working over the past year. I mean, don't forget, this has been going on for 1 year. Those people are also able to see their own weak spots. There are reports that they're working on units of the regular army, which they may have been afraid to use in the beginning, that they're working on them, that they're like making shifts in the structure, in the officer corps and so on and so forth, that they're testing those units. They're sending them to places, they're testing the loyalty. And so I think if Mr. Assad thinks he can hold out, he still has a few cards. And he's willing to play them. He's willing to use utmost violence. And for me, it's not entirely clear that he may not succeed.
And perhaps Stefan Buchen...
But the final outcome, I mean, for me is beyond doubt. The regime will fall at the end of the day, I'm sure. What I'm saying is that a general rule is being realized here. And the rule is a dictatorship like the Assad dictatorship cannot last forever. Someday it has to fall because there's too much cruelty, too much violation of basic rights of citizens, too much dictatorship, and it cannot hold on forever. People have been uprising because of that.
But as long as Western nations make it clear that they're not interested in intervening militarily, does Assad really have to fear anything?
Yeah, I mean, he has to fear, for example, the downfall of his own economic system. He's running out of money, out of income. Prices are rising for basic needs in Syria. The so-called middle class of Damascus and Aleppo, who were loyal to the regime in the first months of the uprising. I remember talks with representatives of this social class in last summer, last autumn. They were saying that this uprising will end and the old order will be re-established and so on. This was an illusion. Now these people are feeling the consequences of the crisis, also in economic terms. I think the sources of the regime are, and the basis of the regime are getting weaker and weaker. And as I said, there will be some day where a critical point will be reached where they won't be able to hold Daraa in the south, Idlib in the north, Homs close to the Lebanese border at one time. There will be a situation where they militarily will have to give up certain regions, and that will be a critical point when we will see that the armed resistance will win and take over.
Well, Alexander, we just heard the middle class, a frustrated middle class, might prove to be more dangerous to Assad than the armed opposition. But perhaps Assad has drawn unfortunate lessons from the Arab Spring. He has seen Mubarak go to jail. He has seen Gaddafi being killed. Does he perhaps think that being ruthless is the only way to survive here?
He fights for survival, but let us not be naive as well. The Orange Revolution or the Arabic Spring revolutions, which we expected for the northern African states, did not happen. We don't have democracy in Libya, we don't have democracy in Egypt, and the same outcome will await us in Syria. I hope you are the specialist that we won't have another civil war between Shiites and Sunnis in Syria after the regime falls.
This is quite probable.
As we see it in Libya this way. So the intervention of the West on one side has become very difficult. Our perspectives for a democratization of the Islamic world, as we all hoped for a year ago, is vanishing. And this makes us also puts us in a problematic situation because we don't know what to do as well.
I agree with you very much. The antagonism between Sunnis and Shias is being highlighted on the Syrian issue because the armed, what I call the armed resistance in Syria, is clearly Sunni dominated. I'm very close to the Syrian field, if I may say, and I know from very well-informed sources that the armed people in the Syrian cities, they are dominated by Sunni Islamist elements. And some people who were also part of the uprising in the beginning, when it had a more civil character, they are starting to voice doubts about what will happen at the end of the day. And clearly, I'm expecting that the conflict will not end with the downfall of the Assad regime because of this major antagonism between Shiites and Sunnis.
Heiko Wimmen, the sectarian violence that might erupt after Assad leaves is very much on the mind of Alawites and Christians. Do you feel there's some base to it? At the end of the day, Assad, of course, himself, he is an Alawite, Shia sect to which he belongs. What would you say?
See, unfortunately, the fears are well-founded. Now, we can talk for hours who's responsible for that. I think the Saudis bear a lot of responsibility too. But at the end of the day, what the regime has done since the beginning is to push this into that alley, into that dead or deadly alley of sectarian conflict, by talking about extremists, by talking about killings of what they call citizens by extremists and stuff like that, without saying that they're Sunni, but of course everybody understands what they're talking about. And they're pushing it, and you had killings in certain places that seem to have a sectarian background, and again, you don't know who's behind it. And people and activists say, well, we've seen that scenario in '82. Very strangely, the Alawis who are killed are always people who are not closely related to the regime. They are people who are sort of like independent, who seem to be only killed because of their sectarian background or to create a certain image. So I think while the danger is real, we should keep in mind who's in the end has been pushing in that direction. Of course, because of the regime calculate that this is one way to keep the minorities on their side: Christians, Druze, Ismailis, and Alawis, which already make up something like 30% of the population if you throw them all together. It's also a strategy to keep moderate, liberal-minded Sunnis, the urban class, on their side, not only for economic interest. There are also existential fears that are whipped up here. And it's very easy to imagine a scenario where, like, certain areas finally slip out of control, as you say. However that happens, I think it's more likely that the armed forces themselves split than that the rebels actually get a military capacity, but it doesn't really matter. The result is the same. What will happen is that you have areas that are out of control. Nobody's controlling them. And then you will have revenge killings. There's a very high likelihood of that. You have revenge killings. Nobody, again, knows who's behind it. But those things then just start spiraling out of control. Nobody knows who's responsible, who's behind it. And I think what we have to do, or what we have to think about as Western countries, as NATO, who has a neighbor state of Syria, is that we have to expect, or we have to plan for a very serious degradation of the humanitarian situation in Syria, where we reach a point where we were perhaps in Bosnia in 1995, where it becomes very, very difficult to justify that you let this going on.
I think you are very right on this point, and let me summarize the tragedy that is happening like this. You said that the Assad regime is trying to sharpen the sectarian conflict and use it for its own purpose. The regime has been always trying to portray itself as the guardian of the secular order in Syria, but now they are spreading fear among minorities in order to keep their loyalty to the regime. It's the Algerian strategy of 1991 when the generals in Algeria also staged violence in their own country in order to spread fear and in order to to keep the Islamists, the Sunni Islamists, out of power. So the then reigning defense minister Khalid Nazar said, "I'm ready to kill 2 million Algerians in order to stay in power." That's the Assad theme. That's what Assad is ready to do. My guess is that he won't succeed like Nazar did in Algeria in the 90s, because the resistance is too strong. It gets too much support. The Algerian generals had the support of France, and Syria doesn't have the support of France. It has only the support of Russia, and that may not be enough to stay in power.
Alexandra, let's look at the current day situation again. The presidential statement has been unanimously approved by the United Nations. Kofi Annan, Envoy Kofi Annan, is now supposed to go back to Damascus and meet with Assad. What are the next steps here?
The next step is, of course, Russia's position in many ways, as you said. Again, I don't think that Russia is an ally of Syria. It is playing with Syria in order to gain much more in the world politics. But Assad is not an ally of Russia in this sense. They have nothing in common. So
but
it depends. Exactly. Russia has a military base there, but not because it likes Syria, because nobody else has given Russia this military base in the Mediterranean, and it's losing its military base in the Black Sea. So if Russia stops supporting Assad because it thinks that it's more important for them to work for the West, stops supplying him with weapons, and stops supplying him even maybe with food, we have another situation, because then he would need to give compromises in order to be able to feed his people. I think this is the next development. But Russia cannot be led again in the role of a minor partner in the Western game, because we did it with Russia in Iraq, we did it with Russia in other parts in Yugoslavia, ex-Yugoslavia, was saying Russia has supported our positions. Russia says, yes, but what we are getting for that? Then share with us the economic benefits which will come after a war, after intervention. And the West never did it. So we have to learn our lessons as well.
And explain to us briefly the motivations behind China's position on Syria.
Same with as Russians, I think. We agree on this point that Russia and China together want a polar system in the world. They hate to live in a world where America dictates everything, where NATO is the only policeman in the world. This is against Russian interest, against Chinese interest. And by the way, if they have supported the former resolution, then if they would have said yes to them or abstained, the way they would probably push the process in the direction of Libya, the war in Libya. And this is the last thing what Russia and China want to do, because at the end, if the world order changes and the territorial integrity of a country will not be the priority as it was in 300 years. But it's after Kosovo it became differently, when human rights issues become more important territorial state of sovereignty of a state. Then China and Russia could find themselves also on a certain side in a corner, because they have this territorial problems in Tibet or Russia and on the Caucasus. They don't want this.
Heiko Wimmen, the conflict, as we said from the onset, has been going on for 1 year now. And as you said, Assad, despite all the difficulties he might face due to economic domestic problems, he's still very much in charge. Has the world underestimated Assad?
Definitely. I mean, there was this whole hurrah after Tunisia and Egypt, and then Yemen was a bit messy. Libya was even messier, perhaps, but we succeeded, supposedly. And now there's one guy who's fighting back with all he has, and he still has something. And talking about the resolution, I absolutely agree with the characterization of the Russian position. I think what we should also be clear about is that, putting the blame on the Russians and the Chinese is a very easy thing. Let's imagine for a second the Russians and Chinese do not veto. Let's imagine the Western countries can pass any resolution they want on Syria. Then what are we going to do? What are we going to do?
What are we going to do?
I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows. I mean, are we going to send an intervention army who's going to occupy the country? Is that what we want to do? Do we have the will? Do we have the means? Do we have clarity over the consequences? I can't see that.
So are you suggesting that the international community is in fact even hiding behind Russia's veto?
That would be a way to express it. I don't really want to say that.
We are not cynical.
We are not cynical.
Not yet.
I think the positions that are expressed are genuine. But just to say, we could solve this if the Russians and the Chinese would cooperate. I think that's far too easy.
And Stefan Buchen, you said numerous times during today's program that you don't foresee any scenario under which Assad can remain in power. But people have been saying that for a few months now, and he's still.
Yeah, it's a question of time. Nobody knows how much it will take. I definitely expect that some areas will slip out of his control. We will see huge movements of refugees into these areas, internally displaced people. Maybe the Turkish government, the Turkish military will be able to open up a humanitarian corridor. I remember that talk on humanitarian corridors was also there during the Libyan crisis without any effect. Maybe it will be different in Syria. Let's hope that for at least.
Very brief answer. Alexander Ra, do you foresee any scenario under which Assad can remain in power?
Not really. But I don't also foresee a revolution there.
And Heiko Wimmen, are Assad's days numbered one way or the other?
I really don't know. I mean, I'm afraid there's still a possibility for a combination of the Algerian and the Iraqi scenario, a very isolated regime, under sanctions, crippled by sanctions, but holding out, using violence, and in the end, if they manage to quell this, if they really stamp it out, after a few years, people will start dealing with them again.
Well, I suspect this has not been the last. It wasn't certainly the first, and I suspect this was not the last time that we discussed the issue in Syria. So we will continue to monitor the situation. I want to thank my three guests for sharing their insights and knowledge into this rather intricate and complex subject matter. I want to thank you out there for watching and hope to see you again next week for a new edition of Quadriga.